Hey everyone, and welcome back. So I was reading some of the comments in one of my videos and something occurred to me. Now, even though it's getting a little bit nicer out here in Flagstaff and I have taken the bike out for a few short rides, I never actually put together any sort of video describing what I do to winterize my bike. So here in Flagstaff, despite being Arizona, we do get proper winters. Over the winter Christmas break here, we got about 2 feet of snow, and just a few days ago, we got another 3 inches. So it does melt pretty quick, but the problem with Flagstaff is we don't have a very large network of snow plows. So the roads get really icy and it takes a long time for them to thaw. So with that said, even if it is 45 or 50 degrees out, I don't like to take the bike out if I know there's gonna be ice on the streets, for obvious reasons. So when it comes to the topic of winterizing a motorcycle, there are some very strong opinions on how you should do it or the right way to do it. For me, I take a very simple approach. I really don't think this is a complicated thing, and I think most of it is pretty much common sense. I will say I think it depends a lot on where you live. If you live someplace that's very humid, that's something you have to keep in mind for overwinter storage. If you live someplace where you might get small rodents or mice in your garage and you're worried about them crawling into open spaces, that's something to keep in mind. But for the most part, I think the common things that you should do to your bike are pretty much common sense, straightforward. Right, so with that said, I'm gonna walk you guys through the handful of things that I do to the Himalayan to make sure that she's properly stored for winter and to ensure a higher probability that it will start up without issue and ride without issue come springtime. So let's get started. All right, so first things first, fuel. Unless you happen to live someplace where you have easy access to ethanol-free gas all the time, you're gonna wanna put some sort of fuel stabilizer in your bike, especially if you know it's gonna be sitting for any significant period of time over winter. Ethanol is known to do some pretty nasty things to your fuel system if it sits too long. So this is precisely why there are products like this fuel stabilizer. Now, if you go online and you do some research on which fuel stabilizer is best, you will find some very strong opinions and people doing all sorts of lab tests and chemical analyses and all sorts of ridiculous things. Honestly, I've been using this storage blend from Stable, like pretty much the most basic kind of fuel stabilizer you can buy, for essentially my whole life on lawnmowers and scooters and motorcycles, and it's always worked great for me. So I really have no reason to try anything else. So all I do to prepare my bike for winter storage when it comes to fuel is when I know I'm about to put it up for storage, I take the bike down to the gas station right down the street, fill it up with the highest octane gas I can put in it, just short of the top. Then I put 2 ounces of the Stable in it, which is what it recommends for about 4 gallons. For those of you on metric, that's about 60 milliliters. And then close it up. I usually fill up a spare canister of stabilized fuel as well, just to kind of have on hand. And then once I've left the gas station, I go for a ride. I go for a 5-10 minute ride around the neighborhood just to make sure that that stabilizer gets all evenly mixed through the fuel system. And then I come home, bring the bike into the garage and shut her off. And that's all there is to it. And just by doing that simple thing, you avoid so many possible problems later, especially if you're using a bike that still has a carburetor. Ethanol does not play well with carburetors over winter. So that's it. 2 ounces of fuel stabilizer in your 4-gallon tank. Make sure that you ride it or at least idle it for 5 to 10 minutes to get that stuff through, to get the stabilizer through your fuel system entirely, and shut her down. Moving on. All right, so now that I'm back from the gas station with a full tank of stabilized fuel, I've gone on a nice ride to warm the engine up a little bit. This is the perfect time to do a winter oil change on the bike. The last thing you want for a bike sitting for 3 months in your garage over winter is for there to be a bunch of cruddy, dirty oil in it. So I use the Modal 5100 semi-synthetic MA2 15W50 blend because that's what it calls for in the owner's manual. But I know a lot of you also use the fully synthetic. So to each your own, use obviously whatever oil you think is best for your machine. But again, this is a great time to go ahead and change out that oil. All right, so another topic of constant debate online is what do you do with your tire pressure over winter? Do you overinflate them? Do you underinflate them? Honestly, I keep it simple. and I just make sure they're inflated to their standard operating pressure. So in this case, 25 on the front, 32 on the back, and I leave it at that. Oh, and I use my bike pump because it's so much simpler. All right, so now that the bike's got a full tank of stabilized fuel, some fresh oil coursing through its engine veins, and adequate tire pressure to keep it good over winter, now comes the fun part. Now we take it out onto the driveway and do a deep and thorough wash. All right, so we've washed, we've soaped, we've rinsed, we've dried, and we've waxed and cleaned the mirrors and the windshield. So all nice and clean. Next thing we have to tackle is the chain. So my process is very simple for the chain. I first do a clean using the cleaning fluid, strip it down, get it nice and clean, and then I reapply my chain lube. So let's do that. So very simply, I use the Maximo cleanup to clean the chain, and I use the Maximo chain wax to lube the chain. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, while the bike is continuing to dry here in the sun, this is also a really good time for me to swap out the spark plug. This is definitely something that you don't need to do every year, but I figure for 10 bucks, it can't hurt to start off the new season with a fresh spark plug. All right, so with the bike still sitting outside here in some good daylight, it's a good time to just kind of walk around it and check for anything that might be out of place or amiss, or, you know, broken cable ties or unraveled electrical tape or loose cables, just anything like that. Tighten any bolts that might be loose, but I also check to see if any paint has chipped off. You know, obviously with being an adventure bike, you get a lot of rocks that kick up, and some of this stuff down here at the bottom can get chipped. Sure enough, this piece here near the side stand has had a few places where paint has chipped off and has exposed the metal underneath. So in these cases, I've just got a can of high temperature black caliper paint, and all I do is I just touch it up a little bit and call it a day. All right, so the last thing I do before wheeling the bike inside, and despite living in a very dry climate, is I apply a very thin layer of this Maxima MPPL, which is really just a fancy WD-40. It's a water displacement chemical. So I basically just apply it to all of the exposed parts of the engine and down by the side stand and the center stand, just to make sure that it's not going to rust over winter. All right, now as far as storage, I always just keep this old curtain on the ground along with a piece of cardboard and plywood for the center stand, just to kind of keep the bike from direct contact with the cold garage floor. All right, so now that the bike is back in the garage, just about ready to go undercover, this is a perfect time to do sort of that one last walk around to make sure that there's nothing weird or out of miss, especially if you know it's going to be sitting for several months. So let's do that real quick. Let's check cables, let's check bolts, let's check loose connections or zip ties, electrical tape, that kind of stuff. All right, so we're just about done. The only things that I have left to do are to cover up any of the openings on the bike that I want to protect from insects or rodents, and then obviously plugging in the battery to keep it trickle charged over winter. So let's do that first. I've got myself a battery tender junior on the wall over there, and here's the plug. I'm simply going to plug it into the to the battery plug right there, and as you can see on the wall, it's already blinking green, which means it's just about charged. And then I've got a couple of just crummy grocery bags here, which are very bad for the environment. So if you're gonna get them, you might as well reuse them. And so the first thing I do is I cover up the instrument cluster just to keep any bugs out of it in case there are any, and then I cover up the exhaust. So let's do that really quick. Doesn't need to be too crazy or too tight. All right, well, last but not least, the proverbial icing on the cake, the cover. So I live in a very dry climate, and the bike's gonna be in the garage all winter. So in many ways, I probably don't even really need a cover, but still, I'm a little bit old-fashioned, I guess, in that I like to at least have a minimal layer of protection over the bike. Now, you can use something as simple as an old bed sheet, which works fine, but I went online and specifically bought this very cheap, non-waterproof cover. I think it was $30, specifically because I don't need anything fancy. I just need a basic cover, basic layer of protection. Now, I do have a very nice waterproof cover that I bought for when I go on my moto camping trips to protect the bike from the rain. But for garage storage, like you can see here on the scooter too, I have this really cheap quality cover. That's all you need if you know it's going to be indoors. So let's go ahead and put it on and wrap this thing up. And that's it. That's how I winterize my bike. Really simple. Now, obviously, depending on what you ride, there might be more things you need to do, especially if you have a really complicated bike. But that's one of the things that I love about the Himalayan. It's just such a simple bike that, you know, other than changing the fluids and giving it a good wash down, there's not really a whole lot you got to do to it to prep it for winter. So hopefully you guys found this useful. And if there's anything that I very obviously forgot to do that you recommend that I do, let me know in the comments. But you know, this formula has been working really well for me over the years. And as I said at the very beginning of this video, so much of it is just common sense. So anyway, thanks so much. See you guys in the next video. Take care and be safe. I almost forgot, there is one more thing that you need to do to properly winterize your bike, and that is to put away your key for storage. Sleep well, my faithful steed. I will long for the days, pining away over winter for our glorious summer adventures.